Hello. Here we are. Week 12. Daylight savings. It's like everything is going to be better soon. So what do we want to do today? I know what I want to do today, but actually this is week 12, so it can actually be about you. My plan for the day is I want to give you some feedback on the second assignment because I have actually marked many of them, not all of them, and I will release to everyone in OUA and everybody who is in face-to-face who didn't have an extension or didn't submit in the extension portal, which I don't think you could do unless you were running late anyway. I'll do that tonight so you can see your own, and realistically it'll probably be Friday before I finish the others. It just takes a long time. I've spent a lot of time with it. But I want to talk about then the two things in mind. One is to give you feed forward so that before you get your marks you can see where it's coming from. But also I wanted to talk about that problem and use that problem as a way of doing some revision in the class. So mapping through it and see, because it was a really complex problem. Headline note before I get to it is I was really impressed actually. I was really impressed with the results, and I gave some of the highest marks I've ever given in contract law. I don't know whether it was just because I got spooked that it was a hard problem, or maybe I have just not given you guys enough respect. There's a range of marks, and unfortunately there are some people who failed. I think the reasons for that with those people will be really clear to them when we go through it. But on the whole, I was really impressed, and the marks are pretty high. But that's a battle I'm prepared to have. I want to talk to you about the exam itself. So what the format of the exam is, talk about doing exams, talk about what it's like to do an open book exam if you haven't done one before. That's part of what I want to do. I have what I call around contract law in 40 slides. Sure, I could make it 80 slides, but there's 40 of them. I don't really intend to go through those. I intend to come back to the ones that matter as we illustrate points. But I'm keeping them in this slide pack because it's kind of like my top 40 slides. They're not new, but they've all come in some way from other bits of sort of highlight things to think about and remember during the semester. And then the last one is to do, I've got some revision problems and bits and pieces for us to have a bit of fun with, to practice doing some problems and to get the answers. So I'm hoping everybody has got a pen and a piece of paper or a computer or something that they can spend some quiet time actually having a go at jotting down the structure of an answer. Yep, putting you on the spot, so we can do that. Also, just to warn you, from about 6:30, a guy whose name I'm going to now forget, Andrew Joe, is going to pop in and sit in on class for about an hour. I participate in a program at the uni called Peer Partnerships, where basically we just kind of like Tinder for teaching, I guess. We get matched with people across the university. I watch a bit of their class, they come and watch a bit of mine. He'll give me some feedback on what he thinks. I give him some feedback on what he thinks. I'm not sure if I'm supposed to tell you about it, but this is a small enough class that if some guy you've never seen before comes in, you guys will be wanting to ask him to do the question, right? Because you just assume he's some slagger who's never shown up to class. Probably don't do that. I hope it's not a test. I've participated for about 4 years. I've learned some really good things. So that's all it is. So just ignore him pretty much, unless you want to actually tell him the things that I'm awesome at or that I suck at in a way that he can give me the feedback gently. That would be fine too. Okay, so that's my plan for today. Everybody happy there? So shall I assume that you want to know what happened with the assignment first? So, relax, you did well. Basically, as I said, these were really good assignments. There were some constant things that people did well, and I really want to point to those because I think they're things that even in an exam scenario will help you. Things like, even though it's only worth a small percentage, being able to write well and clearly and have a good plan really helps. I just can't say it often enough. Using headings. Use headings in your exams. Write down what this section of your little problem response or your critical essay is about. Identifying all of the issues. Now this paper, or this was an opportunity to identify a lot of issues. So also identifying the issues but giving them some sort of order or context was really important. One of the things which I don't think I've suggested to anyone, so I'm looking for a whiteboard marker, which of course I can never find. Just going to, this will probably throw my recording, but I'm just going to do something here to just show you a trick that I use a lot. No, I'm not going to be able to do it that way. It's not going to share. Now it's all going to be too hard. I'm going to do it with my, oh, you got a whiteboard marker? Oh, Sarah, you're awesome. So let's try it. One of the things, again, over here, I'm going to go over here. This will be the easiest way to see it, I suspect. Is if you've got millions of issues, okay, that's not going to work. That's better. If you've got millions of issues, often just getting a matrix, get some post-it notes, get a piece of paper or whatever, think about what these issues are, and then think about it from like how relevant or important is it? And then also think about how difficult or complex it is. This is like a model that works in life. Like, seriously, working out how to punish your children and sorts of that. You've got these different issues. You think, okay, one of the issues that we're dealing with here is, let's pick one. Is it a deed or is it a simple contract? Was an issue that a number of people thought through. Okay? How important is that to what the end result is? Possibly not terribly important. How difficult is it to resolve? Yeah, it was probably more difficult than some issues, but less difficult than others. At the end of the day, if there was an enforceable agreement, there would be some consequences for it. If there wasn't an enforceable agreement, you would take another form of action, right? So yes, it was worth dealing with, but probably wasn't the most important issue at all, of all. Another issue, let's just pick an issue that you might have thought about as you went. Go on.
Should I step out?
Sorry?
Should I step out? Are you talking about assessment?
Yes, I am. Oh, you're not submitted yet. Oh, I'm sorry.
No, I'll step out, yeah, I'll come back.
Yeah, is that all right? Sorry, I'm supposed to...
I'm happy to sit here.
No, thank you. Do you want to just jot your number on a piece of paper and Ayana, can we just give you a call when we're finished? I'll be with this pen. I wasn't, none of this, oh, you haven't done it. Oh, sorry, yeah, if you don't mind. Is there anybody else who's in that situation? And in fact, if you like, in about 10 minutes, I'll stop talking about any issues for the paper. All right? Sorry about that.
I don't.
That's all right. Gosh, you know the issues anyway. I'll just be harder on you. Okay. And then come back, let's talk about a secret issue that doesn't exist. Just to throw them. Like, what's the case? Possum versus, oh, now I know, so I'm saying versus. You guys are doing it to me. I know. Yeah, we'll call it the multi-lemonade case. Yeah, there we go. So another issue that came out of this, the intentions in a big sense, but maybe some sort of fact scenario. So I'm thinking, Melinda signing the agreement. What was the impact of her signing it? Did she sign it as a party to the agreement, or did she just sign it as a witness? What were the implications of that? Now that actually probably had more of an implication for the outcome for her than it might have in relation to something else. So you're kind of making guesses as to where to put these things, but as you sort of sorted your different issues out and you put them in different places, you can kind of see, okay, this issue down here has a high circumstance, high impact, depending on how it comes out, but it's not really particularly, well, sorry, going the other way, it's particularly difficult to sort out, but it doesn't have a high impact, like it's not really going to affect. So let me give you a good example of that, stuff that's not relevant to corporation and to contract law. So working out whether or not they complied with the terms of their constitution in the way that they signed over the agreement. In real life, that's a real issue. In this subject, because we're doing contract law, it doesn't have a big outcome. So that'd be something, Kat might mention it, but it could be a legal issue. I'm not going to spend any time exploring it because it's not going to really make any difference to me at all. And then concentrate on the stuff that's up here. Well, ideally, if there's something up here, that's where you need to target your attention. Do you get what I mean? Think about the people who did well in this were really judicious about making choices about what was important. Now, to be fair, you might have chosen something that was really important that I wouldn't have thought it was as important. But if you were appropriate in the way you described why you thought it was important, and you base that with identifying what the issue is, what the relevant law is, applying the law, then that all made sense to me. So in broad terms, and well, we'll talk about what those issues are as we go forward, but I think the papers that really stood out and did really well not only identified the issues but were judicious. And if you think about words like money, like time, the more important it is, the more money you spend on it, the more time you spend on it, the more words you give it. The less important it is, the less words, the less time. Short note it, particularly if it's an assumption that you're making. So some people, for example, talked about Melinda's capacity. They thought if she's dumb enough to sign a contract that's got this term in it that says that she's going to have no say, then chances are she doesn't have capacity to contract. Now, I'm kind of I'm over-summarising what people thought. It's not a stupid thing to say. But at the end of the day, that probably was a smaller issue than the question of which of the Masters in Cameron's categories did this fit into if it was a preliminary agreement. Okay, so organising yourself in that way was really important. Sorting out the way you present it, listing your questions and your answers. Now, one of the things, and this is a particular comment for our friends online, because as I keep boasting about how awesome they are all the time, you know that they're doing their weekly little discussion board activities, which I can't seem to induce you guys to do. But that's okay, because they're just going to be better at answering exam questions than you. The downside, as it turns out, for some of them is they really use the IRAC model, which they're comfortable with using in the discussion board. It's worked for them in the past. It'll work for them in exams. It'll work for you in exams. But with a complex problem like this, that's not the most helpful model for expressing your answer. Great model for working out what are the issues. Let's get, in my world, it'd be post-it notes with all of the issues somewhere. Let's work out what all the law is, what law applies to which issues. Some of the law applies to more than one of those issues. Oh, there's a hint. That might be a more important complex issue than I thought there was. Then we've got what happens next. What the law is, how do we apply it? So if you're trying to do all of those things separately, it gets very disjointed, and your boss or your reader, depending on which one it is, it's like, I just want to know the answer. I don't need all of this, then all of this and all of this. You need to be able to follow it together in a more logical way. So questions, answers, headings, that kind of stuff. The other thing that really makes the best paper stand out is actionable recommendations. You need to do this for these reasons. This is, how you do it. After you do this, do that. Like step 1, step 2, step 3. Some people did that really well. Again, that's a really good thing to take into an exam as well. It's actually in the real world equivalent of answer the question. At the very end, if you've got to do nothing else, is actually sit there and think, did I answer the question? Also, getting the answer to the question in a place right up front where I can know and sense check what you're doing, those kind of things made a huge amount of difference. Sorry, let me just, I've messed this up now. Not sure it's going to work. Oh yeah, now the biggest single issue that I came across, and I didn't, in the end I went back and adjusted for a couple of people because I probably started penalising with this a bit heavily at the beginning and I pulled back on it, was what the question actually asked you to do was give Dennis some advice to make sure he didn't end up with a problem in the future, about what the precedent should look like, what kind of things a precedent should involve. With very small number of exceptions, the vast majority of people advised the client or Dennis what changes needed to be made to the agreement. So for some people, or the document that had been signed by the guilds. For some people, that actually worked fine and it all was great. For some people, it kind of made no sense, because if you had advised that that agreement was a binding agreement that was effective right now, then it makes no sense to change it. So that became problematic for some people. But at the end of the day, I recognise that was, I'm going to take the brunt of that. I don't think I explained in the problem well enough what was really required there, and I probably relied on 30 plus years of working in law firms that one line about what you need to do made sense to me, and it didn't necessarily make sense to you. So nobody was penalised for that other than me. I beat myself up about it a little bit. I did point it out to a number of people, and I think it is something that you really do need to really think, what am I being asked to do there? And if you're not sure, say so. So I think a lot of people just jump to a conclusion. So that was probably the biggest single thing that I saw happen. Sorry, I think I've skipped a slide. Common areas for improvement. Yeah. Jumping to conclusions. So just going with that. So the better papers said, I made this assumption. So I had assumed that Melinda witnessed her husband's signature and only signed as a witness. Or I assumed that Melinda has signed the document as a shareholder. One or the other. Kind of didn't matter which of those two assumptions, for example, you made. I think the first one sort of made more sense, given the body of everything. But either way, you needed to really then say, but if we really need to verify that assumption. Because if it's something else, it could have a different result. And so articulating that. So but not mentioning it all, that was really quite difficult. Very few people really considered the possibility that some of the document that they signed might have been binding and some of it might not have been. That there's it tended to be dealt with in a binary sense. It's either a preliminary agreement that in its entirety falls within one of the Masters and Cameron's categories, and basically the jury's kind of out between whether it was 2 or 3. I tend to think it was 3. I think it made more sense that it wasn't binding, that at best it was an agreement to negotiate, possibly to remain exclusive in those negotiations, possibly to keep those negotiations secret. But I could see arguments either way. It wasn't meant to be easy, as somebody famously once said. But very few people thought about that idea that maybe some of this could be binding and some of it couldn't. And some people sort of jumped straight to, it's either an agreement to sell the shares or it's not. One of the areas that I thought was quite interesting too, I thought probably one of the simplest explanations, and often the simplest are the easiest ones to deal with, is that maybe an offer was given to them. I don't think it was, but because it was subject to instructions, but a document was provided to them for discussion purposes. They made some changes to it and signed it, so was that an offer? Very few people talked about whether they were making an offer. The question sort of immediately jumped straight to, they've signed it, and you've shown me this case called Neurospan, so the question becomes, is Sidwell bound by it as well? Can you see what I mean? So that got a little bit complex in there. What else in here? Again, what I was saying before, when I was praising people for making judicious choices about where to spend their time, that was probably the opposite of that, when too much time was spent on the stuff that wasn't as relevant. So particularly, by the way, I've still only marked 2/3 of them, so there still might be, or it's probably a bit more. So there might be other things that come out as we deal with this. Some really tiny things, and many of you are going to think that my feedback is quite picky, because I do like to try and point out things that are the little wins that are so easy they're so easy to fix that I may as well point them out, is my view, where I think there's another view is they're so tiny, why would you, why bother? So little things, thinking about the tone of your audience. As a whole, the tone for both the memo and the letter to the client should be quite formal in a way. Now, not overly formal, bordering on Shakespearean use of passive language, tugging a forelock formal, but formal in the sense of respectful and demonstrating that you don't have familiarity. And little things can do that. So even though the agreement used the words Basil and Melinda, if you're particularly writing to the other side, to your client about the other side, using their first name suggests a kind of familiarity that might make your client feel uncomfortable. Like there's nothing in it, but it's thinking about things like that. I purposefully used Harvey Specter because his name gets auto-corrected. Spelling the client's name incorrectly is just don't do that. Now, nobody's going to lose points for doing it, right? But it does demonstrate a lack of attention to detail. And in practice, I can tell you from bitter experience, you can spend months working on the perfect opinion letter and everything is absolutely right, and you get the client's name wrong or swap two numbers in their ACN or do something stupid like that, and the client thinks you're an idiot. Like they do not trust a thing that you have said because you can't even spell Catherine the correct way. So, and I know myself when I've got it, I've had, I've got the world's most common name, slightly unusual spelling. I get, and especially if it starts with a K, if I get a dear Kathy with a K, I think you're an idiot. Like I try not to, I try and push that unconscious bias out there, but I'm looking more carefully at every detail. So little things like that can make a really big difference. Footnote references, they always go on the outside of the punctuation unless it's an em dash. Okay, not on the inside of the punctuation. And again, it's a tiny thing, but it makes it impossible to give you awesome marks when everything else is perfect, just on those AGLC things. Just that consistency with those things, they're tiny, but the good papers will always get those right. And one paragraph, one idea. Don't be afraid of white space. There's not a page limit, and I don't print it out, right? I'm doing it entirely online. Do not be afraid of a bit of white space on the page. Everything just in there, and it is exhausting marking. Don't worry. I don't expect you to feel sorry for me, but I'm reading a hell of a lot of papers. So the ones that come with a heading, with a bit of white space, if they're making 3 points instead of having a long paragraph like this where it's all just there, actually bullet it out or even number it, 1, 2, 3. That stuff it just makes it easier. It's like walking downhill instead of walking uphill. And we take great care to mark against each of the criteria, but it does make it so much better to look at those kinds of things. Think about your reasoning too, and particularly with your audience. Think about particularly the letter. This task has been designed really intentionally, and I know I've said this to all of you in class before. The idea is you have a complex legal problem, you solve it and explain the answer to another lawyer, and then you translate that answer into something in layman's English for a non-lawyer. So if you're a non-lawyer, cases don't really mean anything to you unless you tell the story of the cases. Footnotes are not really that interesting to you. Those kind of things, thinking about that sort of tone, thinking about your reasoning. If you're just, especially with the non-lawyer, this is what the legal issue is, these are the laws that apply to that legal issue, and the other one, and the other one, and the other one, and then this is how the law applies to that first issue, this is how the law applies to that second issue. It's just hard to follow the reasoning. So again, think about the best ways to communicate that. And sometimes in unwrapping the reasoning, then you see the flaws in your own reasoning as you do it. Talk about that. I've mentioned this before, IRAC is a great tool, fantastic way of sorting out your thoughts, fantastic in an essay, in an exam. I would strongly recommend that you think about using IRAC in a really obvious way in an exam, because we are under the pump when we're marking those babies, and actually make it really clear that that's what you're doing, because they're much simpler problems in an exam scenario. But in a complex essay like this, it's, as a way of presenting information, it's fairly limited. Okay, these are my key issues. Oh, it's much too bright in here. These are the things that the best papers covered off on. So these are probably the 2 slides now that I just sort of keep other people away from. The question of whether it was, what the status of that draft document was. Was it an offer or a counter offer? As I think I already mentioned, very few people really address that potential. Was it a preliminary agreement? I think most people at some point got to its preliminary agreement. Then the question once you're thinking about preliminary agreement is which of the categories in Masters and Cameron apply. I think I've already mentioned, my view is it was the third, it's most likely, but I accepted arguments all over the shop. I could see why you would approach it. I've given you individual feedback as we went. Another significant issue in this was what the inconsistencies in the document meant. Like the extent to which, particularly if you thought it was a binding agreement, how do you deal with the inconsistencies? How did the fact of the inconsistencies lead you to a view that it's a preliminary agreement? And the extent to which we learned something about certainty or intention by looking at that agreement itself. I mentioned the consequences of the signature, the impact of that additional clause. That got some people a bit caught up, and a few people really went off on to other areas of the law in relation to that, or they might have thought about criminal consequences, might have thought about directors' duties, a whole range of different things. So that was an area that's kind of, sometimes people just really needed to rein in and kind of, like, I love the fact that you kind of suspend disbelief and get involved in the program, but you have to bring it back into contract law. And then that question of whether there were enough essential terms. Even if you found that it wasn't binding, you did need to think about next step, and so what essential terms there would be to get to the next step. Some other things that kept coming up that were addressed by different people in different ways. The privity question, who the right parties to the document are or to the agreement are going forward, because there was inconsistency there where the subject matter of the contract was the company itself, yet the document had been drafted effectively to have the company as a party, which doesn't, it's like I'm selling you me, and it needed to be with the shareholders. That question of whether it was a deed or a simple contract, which is really partly the Neurospan point. By the way, lots of people did a really good job of summarising what Neurospan was about and why it was important. If they thought it was important, some people didn't think it was important too, which, again, everybody kind of has a different thing. Few people went down the path of looking at Harvey Specter's role in the negotiations and whether he needed to be appointed in writing and whether that added a level of complexity. One person even went down, again, staying outside of the contract law area, was looking at what it meant to have a non-Australian qualified lawyer. Great thing to think about in the real world. Probably some words there that could have been spent doing something else. Fraud or illegality, I spoke about that before. Another issue that was dealt with varying amounts of success was whether there was an illusory term, particularly that right that Sidwell had in the agreement to terminate at any time. So, and the extent to which that could have ended up with impacting the arrangement going forward. So these were dealt with in various ways. So how'd you do? This is what I've marked so far. That orange line is the overall. So we have had a couple of fails. So in fact it says fails or not marked, but I haven't actually included the not marks in there because that would scare the bejesus out of you. Overall I've had a couple of fails. They've been borderline and I'll talk to those people. If Give us 5.
Okay.
Less than 5 minutes. No, we didn't forget. Sorry, I talked too much.
Okay.
Won't be long. But essentially, yeah, we're looking at small number of passes, a large number of credits, and then a very large number of high distinctions. Usually I get a bit more of a curve. So, and you can see how this impacts too. This blue line is presentation. So that's a lot of the stuff I've just been talking about, getting a white space, getting spelling, grammar, AGLC and all the rest of it. That's the area where all of you can do really well. It's really hard to excel at. But it's kind of worth pushing over, and it doesn't take up a lot of energy to really take it into that next regime. And then the green line is really the content element, so the 70%, where again, so just if you look at that, we can see, just looking at how things fall, that there are a number of people who really were at a pass level when it came to content, but the effort that they took to get the presentation, spelling, grammar, AGLC, doing all of that stuff right, will have pulled their marks up. And again, that's sort of more of I've got equal numbers of distinctions and high distinctions in that space. But I have to say, I've not seen that proportion of high distinctions in my marking previously. I don't know if I'm going soft in my old age. I don't think so, though. I've been doing this long enough now. I feel that I'm pretty fair. There are plenty of people, particularly down this end of the spectrum, who don't agree with me, but we'll have that out.